Judge Cordell, thank you so much for joining us. Just first of all, so we can better understand what happened here, tell me some of the instances, the incidents that happened to this black student. What were some of the racial slurs? What were some of the terrible, torturous things that happened to him?
Well, we know from the fact finder's report that there were a series of incidents that occurred in a suite in one of the dorms, and it was a themed dorm where engineering students were. And there were a number of incidents that occurred. Actually, I have in front of me actually a timeline, because this fact finder's report, which is available to the public by going to San Jose State's website, has an appendix in it, and Appendix 4 has a list of what happened when and who did what. So there were, by my count, at least 13, maybe 14 different incidents that were perpetrated by either the roommates that were in the suite, or also by students who were also not in the suite but on the same floor. So they ranged everything from giving this student a nickname that was racially derogatory. The name was 3/5, referring to the government-sanctioned rule in this country. This is during, slavery, right? So that every person who's a slave gets counted as 3/5 of a vote of a person, so that was for plantation owners, so that they could have more votes, right? So there was the race-based nicknames, and then they would lock him in a room and take the handle off inside the door so he couldn't get out. And then the one everyone has heard about, I think, was putting a bike lock, a metal kind of U-shaped bike lock, and locking it around his neck. And there were 2 instances where that occurred, or at least one in which it was attempted, taking his shoes and hiding them, putting a Confederate flag up first in the window so that those outside could see it, and then moving it, having it in the common area in the suite, having a swastika, Nazi references up, writing a racial slur on a whiteboard that was in the room. So those are the kinds of things.
So all in all, by my count, 13 incidents over a matter of weeks, about 5 weeks. Why did no one come forward to report this?
Well, we don't know. I mean, the fact finder didn't have the opportunity to talk to the victim, but it's clear the victim did not come forward and say anything, and we don't know why. There can be a lot of reasons for that. And there were students who knew, because this victim told them, but he asked them to not say anything. And I find that problematic that they didn't say anything, because their silence led to this abuse continuing. So that's a concern about, well, what's the thinking, what's the mentality, what's the moral obligation that students have?
So once the school did find out, and they found out because his parents entered his dorm room and saw the Confederate flag and said, what's going on here? And that's when it all became public. This week, a fact finder came out with his independent investigations findings, basically saying the university acted swiftly and properly, in that they did everything from moving the harassment suspects away from the student and then eventually suspended them. What do you think of the school's response, and what is your task force going to do now as a result of that?
Well, the school's response, I've got kind of 2 different observations on it. One observation is that, as consistent with what the fact finder found, there are rules and policies that the fact finder found they were not broken. They were adhered to by the university. And that kind of, for me, begs the question, if all the rules were adhered to and this still went on for this long, there's something wrong. There's a problem. The fact finder also found that the president of the university and his top staff didn't find out about this until several weeks after the parents came forward and told the folks that were actually in the dorm and working on the staff. And that's an issue that's going to have to be addressed, and I'm sure is already being addressed by the president. So the task force really picks up where the fact finder left off. The task force, which I chair, the purpose is to look at this fact-finding report and then to see what recommendations there ought to be made to the university to implement to see that this never happens again and what lessons we can learn from this.
So you will be looking at, well, why is it that this student didn't feel there was someone or a group that he could come forward and talk to? What else will you be looking at?
We'll be looking at what's the training of those who lived on the floor, the resident advisors, who are really students who work as quasi-staff, and those who supervise the resident advisors. Where were they in all of this? When that Confederate flag was up in the window and they were told to take it down and they did, and there were no further inquiries, is that problematic. It turns out from a fact finder's report, many times individuals from staff had to go to that suite to deal with issues, but yet the red flags they're waving, but it didn't seem to really generate the kind of response it should have. So we're going to be looking at the training for those who work in residential life. We're going to be looking at freshman orientation. These were freshmen. So they didn't have a long time to be at the school before all this jumped off. So what's the orientation? Do they really talk about issues about race and about appropriate behavior? So we have a lot to talk about.
So a lot of questions, and I know this is very transparent, very open. You had your first public meeting this week. You will have public meetings every 2 weeks until April, until when you have your report.
Right, and Tweet, what I think is so unique about this process is that there's a lot of soul searching going on, as evidenced by the first meeting that we had. People really talked about the concerns they have. And what's unique about this is that this is in a public forum. Nothing's being hidden. This is as transparent as it gets. And it's my hope that what we're doing will serve as a model for all of the universities within the California state system. This is the way, when you have an issue, unfortunately these issues come up, or incidents like these. This, in my view, is the proper way to do this. And the president of the university, top staff, administrative staff, were absolutely supportive and are of having this be a very transparent and public process. Because as a result of that, you generate trust in the process and trust in the recommendations.
You're obviously very passionate. Judge Cordell, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.